Good afternoon, everybody. Can I call the meeting to order, please? Welcome to today's edition of the Environment, Flooding and Climate Change Overview Scrutiny Committee. As usual, the meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Today we've received apologies from Mr. Mellon, and Mrs. Seaton is in attendance as a substitute. Ms. Gray has also sent her apologies. A sub has not been confirmed and will update accordingly. Before we begin, can I please remind anyone to only turn on their microphones when you wish to speak or are invited to speak. Thank you. So turning to agenda item number 1. Firstly, minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of November 2025. I move that these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed?
Yes.
Everybody happy with that, and no queries or questions? Right, thank you. On to item number 2 then. I've not received any questions from... Bear with me one moment. Ah, wrong side of paper. Not received any questions from members of the public. We've also not had any questions asked by members under Standing Orders 7.3 and 7.5. Agenda item 4, I've got no urgent items. Item number 5. Next we have declarations of interest. Do any members have any interests they wish to declare? Okay, thank you. That moves us on to number 6 then. Declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? Thank you. Item 7. Petitions. I've not received any petitions. So that brings us to item 8, one of our main substantive items on the agenda, the medium-term financial strategy on pages 7 to 20. I'd like to welcome to the meeting the Cabinet Lead Member, Mr. Tilbury, and Director Anne Carruthers, and the Assistant Director, Joe Gill, Jana Walker, and Susan Baum, Strategic Financial Manager. So welcome, people. I'll first invite the Director to introduce the report. We're going to consider the report in 2 sections. First, we'll take paragraph 6 to 14 of the report, then pause for questions, and then we'll move on to consider the rest of the report. So, Anne, would you like to go ahead, please?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, committee. As the Chair has mentioned, this report provides a detailed overview of the MTFS for the next 4 years, covering the environment, flooding and climate change services within the Environment and Transport Department. It's set, just as a reminder, I'm sure members are well aware of this, but it's set within a context for the Council of a 23 million budget gap for 26-27, rising to 106 million in year 4 of the MTFS. So, just reminding you that of the overall picture of the current financial position for the Council. I'll start with the revenue budget then. Table 1 shows you the annual revenue budget for these services, which you'll see sits around 1.6 million mark for each of the 4 years. So relatively small overall in the context of the Council's overall budget. You'll see a more detailed breakdown in Table 2, and from that there's approximately 900,000 is allocated to flood alleviation type works, and a further 700,000 across the environment and climate resilience side of those services. And that includes things like, there's quite a variety of projects in there, but includes things like Ashby Canal maintenance, tree warden events in the service there, Charnwood Forest work and wildlife verge scheme that we do with parishes on some of our highway verges. There are a few budget adjustments that are listed out for you there. They total 0.31 million net increase and reflect contributions we get to flood alleviation and funding shifts within the department. These adjustments also include pay award and pension rate changes. You'll appreciate that the budget for these services are relatively small there. And as a result of that, and we do look at them, in a lot of detail as well, but there are no savings or growth requirements for those over the MTFS this 4-year period. I'll just reassure you, however, we're constantly challenging our services in terms of efficiency to ensure we deliver them as efficiently as possible. The last thing I'll cover just before we pause to see if you've got any questions on these elements of the report is savings under development. And just a reminder of, they're the kind of pipeline savings. So things that we're thinking about and working up, looking at to see if we think there could be any potential future savings we can actually put into the MTFS. And for these service areas, I think it's fair to say the things we're looking at are currently at very early stages. So we're not in a position really to quantify those to kind of give you an idea yet. They're still too early stage, but we are looking at a various number of options there. And the other caveat, and I will come on to this in the next section, they will be shaped, what we do is shaped by this efficiency review that Newton are currently carrying out for us. And as I say, I'll touch on that in the next bit I'll cover, but I'll just pause there in case there's any questions in that overall revenue budget position, Chair.
Thank you, Anne. Mr. Tilby, do you have anything you wish to add?
Just one small question, please, Chair. Thank you. Anne, the Ashby Canal budget, if it finally comes around, we'll transfer it to Ashby Canal Association, the land of the canal, will that take out all that expenditure from the council, or would there be some we still would need to maintain? Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
The answer to that is actually no, because while we're transferring an element to the Ashby Canal, there's still stretches of the Ashby Canal that sits with us, because only part of that was within the Transport and Works Act order. I can never get it. It's TWAO is the acronym for it, but the legislation under which we transfer, we've just transferred sections because they're the only sections that are needed to rebuild the bits that the Ashby Canal Association will hopefully be taking forward with this transfer. We as a county council still retain existing elements, so we'll have to continue to maintain that, repair, etc. So it won't remove all that from our budgets in future.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think Ms. Pendlebury had a question.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. I note under section 9, apologies firstly, unfortunately my Modern Gov has collapsed completely and I can't access it, so I'm accessing online and from something that's been sent, so forgive me if I got the page numbers wrong. Budget transfers and adjustment. You talk about 0.21 transfer of the LTG revenue funding from highways to flood alleviation work. Isn't the LTG about local transport, buses, etc.? So what will be reduced on the local transport side that will then be transferred over? You also at item 12 say no savings opportunities or growth requirements have been proposed for the Environment, Flooding and Climate Change Service over 2026 to 30. And then you go, despite delivery of extensive savings already, a significant gap remains. I'm just trying to clarify that little bit, if that's okay.
And do you want to take that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, on the first part about the local transport grant, government have, I was going to just touch on this very high level under the factors influencing our delivery. Government and the arm of government, Department for Transport, has recently come out with announcements about consolidating funding. And while that sounds like we're getting one funding pot of note, there's still a number of streams under it, of which LTG is one, the local transport grant. However, another strand under that is the bus fund grant. So there's specific funding for bus services and improvements there that's separate to the local transport grant. The local transport grant is actually really quite wide. We can spend it on, and this is the words of DFT colleagues, anything highways and transport related that's not real. And we can't do real improvements without getting improvement for them, without getting approval from Department for Transport. So we are actually putting local transport grants into, we're interpreting it as wide its form as possible. Some of that's actually going into highway maintenance, because you will all know as well, how challenged we are in maintaining our highways out there. So it's getting spread quite wide widely, including on things like flood alleviation, highway drainage matters, etc., that help with this kind of agenda in here that, you know, it comes under the portfolio of this. But just to reassure you about buses, there is separate funding for buses, and actually there's a clear requirement for the Department of Transport that we have to spend it on things that improve bus services and outcomes for bus passengers. So just reassure you on that front. The other aspect of it, sorry, I didn't quite get the second point of it, because the paragraph I've got in paragraph 12 that you referred to just states there's no savings and growth opportunities. But you were mentioning within, I'm not quite sure where you took the bit of, sorry. Sorry, it's probably not particularly clear, so apologies for that. That paragraph 15, I think, setting the wider council context. And, you know, as you know, we've been delivering savings well over a decade now, and we have taken an awful lot out of already out of the system. For instance, just to give you an idea, across environment and transport, since about 2009-10, we've taken out, it'll be nearly up to 30 million a year of our revenue budget. Now, I think in relation to that paragraph 12 you're seeing there, go back to just a reminder, the overall budget we've got here for these environmental, you know, services, we're talking about 1.6 million. And that goes across a wide range of services, actually, and they're quite, as you know, they're quite in demand, etc. They're really worthwhile things to do. It's quite difficult to take money out of that. We're not at the moment proposing, there are no proposals there to take money out of that in terms of delivering savings. I just caveat again what I said earlier, just to reassure you, we're always challenging our services to make sure what we are spending is spent as efficiently as possible, so we're getting best bang for our buck. So, you know, we're not complacent. We are driving efficiency where we can, but having said that, we're not proposing any savings to come out of that area.
Yeah, please, Karen.
Paragraph 19, you talk about the first stage of work was focused on any immediate opportunities to accelerate existing MTFS savings. And I know it's not this committee, but you talk about the first of these included in the draft MTFS position is reablement in adult social care. That kind of made my heart go a little bit. If we're taking money out of reablement, am I reading that incorrectly?
I think, you know, I was going to come on to the Newton work and what they're doing in the next section, but since you've asked me now, I'll just come to that. They have been working, it's a very, I'm sure you'll appreciate, a very fast-paced project. They came on board in December, and, you know, it's 4 months to the end of March. However, as you know, we're going through the budget setting process for next financial year, which all has to be buttoned down by February. It goes to the Cabinet in February, and hence us all coming to these scrutiny committees. Newtons, therefore, were tasked with doing some very early kind of fast-paced work to look at if there are key things that we could accelerate, bring forward and implement for financial year 26-27 to go into next year's budget. And they've identified a number of things, of which that adult social care reablement is one of the key things in that. Unfortunately, I'm not best placed to answer your questions or to give members any reassurance. That would come under the Adults Scrutiny Committee, and for them, and then move on to, you know, Scrutiny Commission and then all the Cabinet process. All I can do is factually report at the moment that is a proposal, one of a number that would be going into the going through the February process for the 26-27 financial year. Unfortunately, I cannot answer your questions around adults. It's for my colleague John Wilson and his team.
Thank you very much. It's just anything that hits the most vulnerable in society is going to make me panic a little.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a question from Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, mine's a bit of a follow-on question, really. It's again regarding paragraph number 12, and it is, I apologise for the vagueness of it. It is a bit of a how long's a piece of string. You said that there's no opportunities for growth requirements or growth requirements in the future, and then you went on to say that any future growth will be shaped by the efficiency review. Now,
we've had it on the record by leader that he's hoping to arrange somewhere around the £74 million worth of savings. He's gone on record and saying that 2 or 3 times now. With a £1.6 million budget, what are the aspirations of this council? Because I'm sure Mr. Tilbury, as lead member, has probably got a shopping list as long as his arm. So I'd be interested to know what you would like.
Sorry, carry on.
My shopping list. What I would like in terms of these services here. I mean, that's quite a big question, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, we have our key, when I think about it in terms of our policies and strategies of what we're trying to deliver under these remits, which come to this committee, and you'll be aware of those. Be it and we'll come on to one later, our climate resilience delivery plan, etc. We're setting those out. We are setting those out in the knowledge of our funding that we've got available, and equally in certain areas of the work, doesn't matter whether it's climate resilience part or the flooding part, we will always maximise the funding available for us and go for grant funding where opportunities come up. In many of these areas, there are, other opportunities that will come up over time. I don't think I can sit here and list right now for you, we'd like to do this project or that project, etc. We've got clear plans moving forward with the budgets we've got and the budgets that's been put forward through the MTFS of we know what we will be delivering. If further funding becomes available, either through grant funding, etc., obviously we will go for that and be able to add on to that. What I can see at the moment is we will be going for and striving to deliver what we put in those plans that set out the work programmes over the next few years for those services. I don't know if Mr. Tilbury's got any other views on that. However, from the officer point of view, we will be delivering what we've set out in those plans that have come through these processes and are improved through, those member approval processes.
Okay, thank you for that. And one final question we've got from Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking there at the, got funding for Ashby Canal, tree wardens and all that. Is any provision being made for flood wardens going forward into those figures?
I can answer that one. No provision has been made at the current time. We are currently looking at following, I'm sure members will recall, there was a motion to full council, time flies, doesn't it? Was it October, was it December? Sometime at the late last year about the flood warden service. We are currently working with, that service is currently managed by the Resilience Partnership. It's not managed by us in Environment and Transport. It's currently managed by the Resilience Service. With the proposals being put forward, we're looking at, in order to deliver on that, we're looking at transferring it over into the Environment and Transport Department. But as part of that, we're looking at what it would cost. There's no current budget to manage that service. So we're working up at the moment what that may cost. Now, that then could lead to a growth bid to fund that. At the moment, there's no budgetary allowance for that.
That was basically my question, because I didn't see any allowance in there, if any allowance had been done yet. So that's just working forward. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Are we all happy? Move on. Yeah, I'll go back here. Okay. So we're coming on to the second part then. So Anne, you're still in the spotlight.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yep, and I'll just we've touched on it, but I'll come on to the efficiency review that has been undertaken by Newton. That, as you know, has been initiated in response to the Council's financial pressures and position. It's a comprehensive review to looking at redesigning service, optimising our resources, accelerating savings, and anywhere that we've omitted to, we haven't found yet over the last decade or so that we've been going around this hoop of driving savings and taking cost out of service delivery. And that really is focusing on those budget gap figures. I mentioned to you earlier. The scope of the review set out in paragraph 17, just as a reminder for you, and the recommendations, as I said, are kind of expected in the spring, and we're looking at March, although as we've already covered, there is a kind of stage one of that, looking at what can go into the 26-27 MTFS, that stuff that's happening at pace. The opportunities for these particular services under this remit will be considered as part of Newtons are proposing a place-based service efficiency review, and that's much wider than the remit of here, but we will include the services under this, looking at those place-based ones, and that's how we'll take account of if there's anything further that we can be doing that we're not already doing. And also, I think, aligned to that, we've got to be saying, and again, not just for, the environment, the flooding type of services, it'll be across the board, but actually it's really looking at how can we take advantage of digital and technology to help us on that, so there may be some investment there, but actually it might help us drive savings and efficiencies in our services. So we're really keen to use Newton's experience and knowledge of that to see where can we really look to implement a bit more digital tech, AI, whatever, to help us drive that service efficiency and integration of services. I'll move on to the sections on factors influencing our MTFS delivery, and there's quite a few things there that do influence, some positive, some not so positive. I mentioned that one earlier about multi-year funding and consolidation of funding from Department for Transport. We have, as a sector, been asking for multi-year funding for years. In the moment, the way it works, you get a 1-year annual allocation. Now, I'm sure you all get that makes it very difficult if you want to procure contracts over 3, 4, 5 years. You can't do it because you don't have the guarantee of the funding. Those things, procuring over longer periods of time, drive efficiencies. You get better value for your money. Same with actually your programme development of projects and delivery of projects. Your planning and your delivery is far more efficient if you can build it up over a number of years than stop-start year on year, because when you find out what funding you've got and what you can actually deliver. So that's really, really positive. And equally, we've got some opportunities with some of that funding because of how wide it is, local transport grant being a prime example, to really focus on some of the areas that maybe we wouldn't have from those siloed funding streams we used to get. This is for cycling, this is for buses, this is for maintenance. We've got a bit more flexibility to put into things, more environmental things like flood relation, resilience and adaptation around flood, highway drainage, that kind of thing. So there's some positive things there on how we can deliver under this remit. One of the challenges for us, however, is managing capital and revenue spend. I always think it's a technical accounting thing, but it's all just money. Can we not just spend it? But actually, it does cause us some issues because we are so revenue tight. And it's revenue that pays the staffing costs to deliver. Even if you've got all this capital money, you need people to deliver it for you. It doesn't deliver itself. People need to deliver that for you. And actually, the way we've operated it in the past is something called, if you want a technical explanation of this, I'm going to revert to my colleague Susan over here, but we do a capital substitution. Basically, put capital in to the central pot and get some revenue out. DFT funding grants, actually, there's a limit to how much we can do that because it's penalising us with the DFT funding grants. So we're going to have to look carefully about how we manage that in future. And that is, it is a difficulty for us. I'll just flag that one. So we are working on how we can best manage that. Other factors include things like climate changing, bringing more severe weather, that costs us more money in our services. Those increasing climate related risks mean more investment in flood alleviation and resilience measures, investigating flooding work, working with communities. It drives the demand for those services, and i.e. by that demand I mean more money needed to deliver on them. Unless we've got more grants coming in, that's very, very difficult for us. Just moving on, you're aware that some of our work will be across these service areas, particularly around flooding and resilience, are being supported by a move of funding from carbon reduction reserve into these areas of work, and that money becomes available from April. So we're busy working up the plans. I think we've discussed with you before what we'll be doing with that, but again, that's a positive in some of those service areas because we can begin to implement those from April. If we just move on lastly then to the capital programme, in terms of that, capital programmes. So the capital works we've got for these service areas, that's summarised in table 3 for you. It totals nearly £5 million over the 4 years of the MTFS. It's funded by grants and reserves, and it's split largely across flood alleviation works, with a small amount. Ashby Canal's come up already, but a small amount's gone into that as well. The property flood risk alleviation is funded through grant. That's from the Environment Agency. Just thought it was worth pointing that one out. And lastly, paragraph 34 sets out future projects that we think may need capital. We're not allocated at the moment in the MTFS. We're still working them up, and they would, if we need them, we'd put the case forward and make the business case for inclusion in future MTFS. But just to let you know, there'll be other things coming along, and we're working on that pipeline as well. That's all from me, but happy to take questions on that, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. There was nothing coming from Joe. Was Joe going to make a comment? Okay, have you got anything to add, Adam?
Yes, please, Chair. Just a quick one again for Anne. You mentioned the grants, and it needs staff to actually execute those grants. What are the staffing levels like in the department to get make sure we action these grants? Thanks, Anne.
I would say it was variable. Some areas we challenge to recruit the right skills in the right place, you know, and particularly we're competing with the private sector. We're competing for the same skills that the Environment Agency needs, Severn Trent Water, National Highways. Often those organisations plus the private sector can pay more than we can pay. So it can be difficult for us to recruit those skills. We will use agency, but as we all know, it's a challenge, you know, to then how do we keep down our agency spend, because often we're paying more, but actually we've got no other option. But, you know, generally in some areas, you know, drainage engineers, etc. Sorry, yeah, it can be really, really difficult to get those skills. They are fairly scarce. It's an ongoing challenge for us, Adam, is the reality of the situation.
Okay, thanks. I think Adam's happy with that. Sorry, this is the bit where we go to Joe. I think we're going. Oh, okay. Any more before we move on to section 9? Any more questions? John.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a quick one. In the future developments bit, it mentions Appendix C, which we haven't got. So I'd just like a bit more information on that. I'm a little bit suspicious of this green vehicle fleet mention. On the district council, there's a lot of money being wasted on replacing vehicles with green vehicles. So I just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit.
I'm advised the Appendix C is a typo. It should refer to Appendix B, so apologies for misleading on that. So I could see why people would be slightly think there's one missing, so apologies for that, but it should be actually Appendix B. In terms of green vehicle fleet, we are having to look at, consider a business case for... I am told, sorry, having not just read it to make sense of it again, is there aren't any future developments in this category. It refers to the highways and transport element of the E&T budget. For the highways and transport and waste scrutiny. And that one.
Budgets. Sorry, the budget sits within highways and transport under Pat Clark, but the kind of policy driver to look at it obviously sits crossing over these two. So it's probably slightly confusing. So that's probably why. But we can send you the details of the highways and transport information separately if that's helpful.
Sorry, I've just woken up into why it's here, etc. As Janet quite rightly says, the budget is held within the highways and transport. The reason we've listed it here is some of the outcomes will contribute to some of the objectives of the environment agenda overall. Now, to your point about, well, I understand your point was about some concerns around that green vehicle fleet. However, what we're looking at the moment is the feasibility of charging infrastructure in our depots. We don't have that. Given at the moment, the government has a mandate for when new ICE, you can't purchase any new ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine, so fleets would have to move over. We're only looking at the feasibility at the moment because there's a long way to go to, one, understand what would need to happen in order to do that, and two, obviously keeping a watching eye on what that national legislation is setting out.
Thank you, Anne. I think we've got one more question from Ms. Punchbury.
Hi, at paragraph 26, you talk about the capital substitution becoming increasingly problematic, and you say this could result in the scaling back on highways work, including flood alleviation. And then in 27, you talk about climate change and bringing a greater need to invest in measures dealing with increased levels of highway flooding and address drainage systems. I've got a specific issue in my area where there is an ongoing flooding issue that I'm told can take several months, if not years, to resolve. Is that going to be impacted? Are we going to see a reduction in resolving flooding issues, bearing in mind it's increasing?
We've got, I mean, sorry, just that thing on capital substitution there, where we get enough grant funding in, obviously we can deliver the capital schemes on that. Sometimes you can't cover the whole cost of the staffing element of that. We are looking at other things because it's to do with the accountancy rules in terms of LCC staff would have to be revenue funded. If we put it externally or got agency staff, we can charge capital to that. So what I'd say is we've been working closely with our finance colleagues about how we deal with that challenge that's just come to light around capital substitution. And I can't 100% reassure you, but we're striving to get round that to make sure that for the capital funding we've got, we can deliver on that, because we know absolutely the demand for this work is not going away and it's going to go up. So there's lots more we can do even beyond the budgets we've got. And so in terms of that funding, we're doing what we can to work to get around that challenge to make sure that we can deliver on those projects. I'm sorry, I can't get into I don't know your individual specific one, but the overall premise is we're putting pressure on our financial colleagues to make sure that we are not hampered by that new requirement that's coming out of government.
No, I mentioned the specific issue because if we're saying we're being challenged on flooding and the funding is going to reduce, how are we going to deal with all these? Because they are all specific issues to somebody. And it's important to the people who it is impacting. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else to add?
Sorry, Chair, I just wondered if it's worth confirming, just because you asked about the flood resources. In the proposals we've put forward this year, there is not a reduction in the staffing resource to do that. And in fact, this committee will be aware, obviously we've got slightly more resource than in the baseline budgets because of the money that was reallocated. Having said that, we haven't got a full set of staff because we're trying to recruit them. But the budget is there to do that. And so in terms of those specific projects, that issue is not affecting this year's budget. I think the point remains that the less it's not spare, is it? Susan will have me for that. The less revenue available in the authority, the harder it is for us to do that and to maintain our own in-house staff working on capital projects. So we've prioritised that at the moment. The staffing levels and the resource, the budget has not been reduced this year in flood alleviation. So we will continue to work on that programme, which, as you say, does take years anyway, because we work with the stakeholders. The process for the EA, for instance, depending on where you are, could take time. But just worth clarifying that issue has not caused us to reduce our staffing resource budget on flood alleviation this year. So as we move into so hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Joe. One more from Mr. Till.
Yeah, just let me know that flooding issue. I've just emailed, just sent you a little message actually. Cheers.
Thanks, that's quick. Okay, any more questions? One more there from Sorry, I can't see anything.
Susan.
Susan, sorry.
Just to clarify, in terms of the capital substitution side of things, we've previously had conversations with the DFT and we have looked at our financial policies. That's now been adapted to make sure that we can cover the budgeted capital substitution that was previously required. So we've gone through it line by line, each individual spend that we've done to try and make sure that we can cover everything within the capital and the revenue. So as it currently stands, as the budget is, we are okay. So it's just giving that assurance that we've sorted the issue, but at the time of producing the draft report, it was an issue we were facing.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions or anything to add? Okay, well, then I recommend that the comments are submitted to the Scrutiny Commission and the Cabinet. And I think we're all okay with that. Okay, well, that brings us on to the next item, item 9, which is the Environmental Performance Report for 2024 to 2025. And the Assistant Director of Environment Waste will introduce this item. So if you'd like to take it away. Oh, Joe, sorry, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also just going to introduce Vicky Comey, my Head of Service, and James O'Brien, a team manager who have worked on the report that you have, that quite extensive report. So hopefully if you've got any specific questions when I do the brief talk over and you want to dig into any of the indicators, they will hopefully be able to assist. So through you, Chair, obviously this is the comprehensive annual report which Scrutiny receive. I think this is possibly the first one that yourselves have had. Setting out the performance in delivering the Council's environment strategy and associated strategies and plans. So we've touched on earlier things like the net zero plans, and I'll come on to those, but it covers that whole gambit of environmental strategic action plans and documentation. And it looks at both the County Council and the wider Leicestershire progress, as well as the performance of the Council's environmental management system. And if you want an explanation of what an EMS is, it's covered under point 15 in the report, so apologies for the jargon. The policy section of the report from point 2 does set out all those key previous cabinet decisions linked to the environment strategy and those associated targets and plans. I won't go through them, but they are there for your historic information. And the full report is appended from page 29. But it essentially is divided into 2 sections. So the first one covers the County Council's environmental performance as its own organisation, and the other provides details on performance and progress for Leicestershire as a county area geographically, and is considered against a series of themes and KPIs, as well as providing a summary of the Council's greenhouse gas report, which is in there as well for 24-25, which the government require is published annually. So we have to produce that. I wasn't obviously going to go through the report in detail, but rather I'm going to try and pick out some of the headlines and key messages. So if I start first with the County Council's own performance, there's been a 9.5% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to the previous year. So we were left with around 8,400 tonnes of CO2 equivalent still to be tackled by 2035's national target. And it builds on some really strong performance since 2008-9. So we've delivered over a 76% reduction since that period. And we are ahead of target within a year, but I think it's fair to say that we're off track against that 2035 target based on those current trajectories. If we plan forward, it looks like we will be short. So that means that we will have to consider some form of offsetting. Officers will need to do some work and liaise with the lead member, but we'll likely need to consider that at some point in the future. And just on that sort of trajectory, if you wanted to look at it, if you look at page 56 in your pack, you get a sort of graphical representation of what we think is happening with those forward trajectories. If I move on to some of the other wider environmental areas and the environmental management systems performance, just picking a few, we've had some really strong performance on driving down electricity and water usage, whilst I think on-site renewable energy generation has reached a record high for that year. So we got to 20.7% of consumption. I mean, there's still work to do. The target is just over 30%. So it's a really stretching target, but really strong performance in terms of renewable energy produced. Office waste usage is up, could be linked to the buildings being busier. Office paper purchased is actually staying quite low, so we've had a small fall, so people are not utilising too much in terms of paper usage. We've had 2 environmental complaints upheld, no environmental incidents in that period, and we had 1 minor non-conformity found where our EMS was externally audited, which is pretty good for an organisation of our size, though obviously we aspire not to have any at all. We are currently managing, when we started the report it was 2, but we're down to now 1 environmental and 6 climate change high risks across the council. But we've got no environmental enforcement or prosecutions for the council in that period. From a legislative policy position, we've had 2 key government bills come in the period they're listed in the report, and there's some really significant regulatory requirements placed on the council following the introduction of the Environment Act in 2021, and we've talked about that in some of the other reports that we've brought to the committee in the past. So if I just move on then to wider Leicestershire, the greenhouse gas emissions for 2023 were 4.33 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. That was down 5% on the previous year and a 45% reduction since 2005. So again, that's similar pattern in terms of emissions reduction, with that direction of travel is positive. But again, we think projecting forward, Leicestershire's overall will not be on track to meet the 2050 national net zero target. That said, EV charging locations and vehicle ownership are up at around about 25%, that sort of region. Renewable energy generation and capacity also up. There's been some really strong progress on planting trees, that plant a tree for every person by 2030. For the period that we're reporting on, we were at almost 500,000 trees planted against that 700,000 trees target. And I think the lead member has talked and with colleagues in this room about potentially increasing that ambition to 1 million trees going forward and building on that performance, that strong performance. In section 15B of the report, there are headlines on other areas like waste and recycling performance, air quality, and progress with some of the partnership projects that happen across the county area. So through the LCAN project, Levi, and Solar Together. And that's using funding that has been secured from a number of bids and sources. That runs to a number of millions of pounds worth of funding, but that's drawing in funding to work in partnership with others to try and deliver on these agendas. So if I just then go on to conclusions, overall, there have been gains made on the net zero targets, but the trajectories suggest we're collectively not on track. Hence partnering and I think wider funding opportunities are going to be really key going forward to drive some of that activity. Lots of activity on wider environmental agendas and projects in what I think is a busy legislative space and an expanding agenda, which we've touched on earlier. I think that'll require some really careful prioritisation and resourcing, in terms of what we deploy resource to. And hopefully an example where that prioritisation has helped to unlock progress is that recent cabinet decision to redirect resources to the climate adaptation and severe weather. Anne mentioned it earlier, that 2 million carbon reserve, which actually will be the first time we've sort of had funds to start and tackle some of those earlier referenced climate change risks, those 6 high scoring risks. So with that, I'll probably pause. I've not obviously picked every single indicator, so apologies if I didn't cover one that you might want to pick up as a question, but between myself and colleagues, happy to take any questions, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Does anybody have any question? Craig.
Thank you, Chair. So somebody that's just bought an EV and thoroughly regrets it. Beforehand, I did have an ultra clean diesel vehicle that basically chucked out water. But I'm old enough to remember when diesels were horrendous and they chucked out all sorts of pollutants. The latest diesels before the government stopped basically any further development of diesel technology were literally chucking out water, really environmentally friendly. That's not our decision. But what I am noticing at home, certainly, is my electric bill has gone through the roof. Doesn't say how much the council is charging more in electric with the electric fleet that we've now got or building in. Is that a noticeable difference?
Thank you. Would somebody like to answer that?
I think the answer is, to be frank, at the moment we have very few electric vehicles as a council fleet.
Is that something then we are factoring into the future NTFS? Because obviously if we go fleet wide to EV, it's going to go through the roof, and obviously electricity prices are very volatile.
We will do, absolutely. And just touching on the end of the conversation of the previous report there, first thing we'd have to do, however, is fully understand what we need to do as the authority in terms of capital investment for charging infrastructure. And it's not just a case of us sticking in charging points, it's actually the electricity substations and the power, etc. So there's a business case to be done then, and that then needs to factor in, if we can manage to transition to electric fleet over time, what that means in terms of your ongoing electricity cost. Absolutely need to be factored in.
Thanks, Anne. And I think Nick has got a couple of questions.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of bits. I'm just confused on some bits in the report headlines for section 15. So the building's getting busier, but water usage is down by 11%. I just don't get that. Are people not washing their hands anymore? I'm sorry, that's a bit worrying, that one is. And then we also go on to the fact is that on-site renewable energy generation reached a record of 20.7%, and we're aiming for 30.9. Can we actually, with what we've got on our buildings, meet that 30.9? Is that actually a possible target? Because I thought all our buildings have now got solar on them and everything else. So is that a target we can actually meet with what we've got in our buildings? Then my next one again is the fact is that we're using less paper actually in our building, but our waste from the building has gone up by 97 tonnes. So where's that waste coming from? Is that third-party waste what people are bringing into the building? Or how is that going up if we're actually losing less paper within the building? So actually, a couple of questions, just the figures don't add up for me, sorry.
Through you, Chair, there's some push and pull on some of those figures. I'll pick up the waste one. So obviously the building, when it's in use, officers, they're buying stuff from the canteen, they're bringing in packed lunches, they're producing it's general waste. So the equivalent of at home, your black bag waste. So we have bins infrastructure on all the floors. We do encourage recycling. So you sometimes see a corresponding link between recycling going up and general waste going up. So it's not so much paper consumption to carry out office-based activities, but there will be some of that going into the bin. So it is probably just that the usage levels in the buildings is up. So you're seeing extra going up. There's an interesting challenge for officers. If we're not seeing a marriage between waste going up, which we can accept, we expect, and recycling going up, then we need to re-educate the staff. Now they're back in the building to use the bins, the containers, the ability to set aside their waste for composting, etc., because they've got a suite of infrastructure. So we will be monitoring that. And then the paper consumption is more about you want to print off a report or produce something. Overall, we have not gone back to our pre-COVID levels of paper usage and consumption. Yourselves, we don't produce the committee papers in hard copy. So there's a huge downturn in producing those really hard documents where we can avoid it. So it's less, if that makes sense. In terms of the other stuff, I'm going to hand over to James around certainly the 30.9% target, and it probably links to the biomass boiler. And James will tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the water data as well. We're not as confident with the water data inside the building. We're increasingly aspiring to get really strong data on water consumption, but historically it was poor, our ability to extrapolate what the data was actually telling us. So that's another thing that we've been working on. So it'll be interesting to see whether James can add anything on both of those things.
Take them in turn. I would take with the water first of all. Water use isn't just based on buildings, it's also based on some other land holdings, farms and so on. So there'll be other variabilities in terms of the demand on water use. And it also depend on the weather and also a lot sort of factors. Like a lot of these things, there are various factors at play that give us the end result figures. And it can be quite complex. And as Joe said, we push and pull factors happening simultaneously. On the waste one of the reasons that the waste rose this time was because you'll recall 2020 COVID laptops. So a lot of laptops came to the end of the five-year time period. So we had a peak in ICT waste in 24-25, and that contributed a significant amount to the increase in the waste. We've also found out since we've written the report that there was an error on one of the spreadsheets that we had been sent by ICT on the figures, and that'll account for about 50 tonnes of the 97 tonnes increase. So it's not as bad as we first envisaged, and we are continuing to investigate that 97 tonnes, understand is it correct, and so on. And we'll correct it in the future once we get to the bottom of the understanding the figures. The renewables target we believe is potentially unachievable at the moment. It was set at a time when there was a lot more ambition at play from lead members and so on, and property colleagues in the energy team are currently in the process of reviewing the energy strategy in which that target is set, and is probably going to be reduced going forward. But that's something they're looking at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. I think we've got a question now from Mr. Bloxham.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is about the fleet again. It says in the report that we've moved on this year to using hydro-treated vegetable oil. So the first question is, are we still using that? Good. Okay. Have we reviewed it in the last year since the reports came out in the media about a lot of it being fraudulent? That a lot of it was actually virgin palm oil rather than waste produce, which would obviously be bad for the environment. And the second question is, do we have an idea how much that's costing us extra in terms of HVO being more expensive than diesel?
Would who's volunteering?
Sorry, Chair, we're all just double checking the palms in the background. So the HVO that is used pretty much predominantly in the waste fleet. So it's the really busy part of the fleet, you know, they go and service all the containers at the recycling household waste sites. And we have only been doing that for, I don't even think we've been doing it for 2 full years yet. So we're in that sort of either the end of the first year into the second. Lots of benefits, you know, it's got a lot longer shelf life, for example, before you need to replace it. It's really less abrasive on the engine. So, but we will be continuing to do a review of that to understand if it's adding other benefits over and above just the use of it relative to diesel. The question of
sorry, back to that question. Do we know how much it costs extra per year?
Yes.
Because, for example, at District Council, they use it for their bin lorries, and they've said it's 90,000 extra a year. Which, if we've got a similar amount or larger, that's, you know, quite a lot of money extra.
Yeah. So just in terms of cost, we've got a budget of up to £110,000 for the differential between standard fuel that we would use for the fleet and conversion to HVO. We are not spending at that level. So because the market for HVO is quite volatile, you don't get a price certainty for a long period. So you're buying either in bulk when you need to fill your tanks, but they don't give us a 12-month price. We have to pay the market price at the point that it's available. And we are tracking under what we sought when we asked as part of the MTFS to do that activity. So we are fortuitously this year that we've been using it, we're underspending against what we've budgeted because we're getting good prices to buy in the HVO. I will have to go away and double check, but we went through a formal procurement. Crown Fuels, I can't remember off the top of my head, but we went through ESPO, one of our internal major corporate procurements, to make sure that we could secure what we needed through that contract. But I will have to go away and double check your question around, you know, any risk of sort of fraudulent activity on the purchasing of.
Yeah, because obviously if you're doing it for environmental reasons,
Absolutely.
buying virgin palm oil
Yeah.
is going to completely
Correct.
offset that.
Yeah, so we will take that away and double
Thanks.
check.
Okay, thank you. We have a question now from Ms. Bottomley.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, if that's all right. The first one was about the 30.9% renewable energy generation target. So thank you for already bringing that up and some of the clarification there. One thing I did want to ask, though, because after the original response, it sounded more like there is not the desire to strive for that target anymore, rather than it is not achievable. And in my mind, they are kind of different things. Could we have some clarification on that? I wanted to also ask about, on a wider point, I know there is a desire from the administration to get more people back in the office. But we're talking about office waste increasing already. And then on page 48, paragraph 89, we're talking about mileage claims have been down since pre-pandemic levels. And that has been attributed partly to smarter working policies. Is there a concern that actually a change in policy on a wider level is going to have a negative impact in our environmental kind of things we're striving for here? I also wanted to ask, in the report headlines, and I don't know if I'm just massively overthinking it, it mentions things being reused, composted and recycled. How do we know if people are reusing or composting at home? I just couldn't figure out how we decided that. It's in the report headlines, it's in X, it's mentioned there. And the only other thing I wanted to ask was, we've seen obviously a little increase in fly tipping. Do we know if that's in specific areas? Do we know why that might have happened? And are we working with boroughs and districts to try and prevent that, and kind of what steps are we taking to stop that happening further? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to take that one? Okay, Joe.
Sorry, I'm gonna. James is too far away, because the turn of phrase, James, may need to be come back on in terms of the 30.9 and the question of whether it's ambition or capability. And sorry, we might need to clarify that. But if I just touch on some of the others, in essence, you asked about sort of, vehicle mileages and smarter working policy, and is there a risk to some of our environmental ambitions where we change policy, The short answer is absolutely yes. We've had some benefits. We've not gone back to some of our pre-COVID activities because we've changed policies on printing everything off, as was the example we talked about earlier. But yes, if there was a significant amount of travel that is physical rather than via Teams and meetings and so on, and that's about us all as officers being measured and still aspiring to use the technology. But there is absolutely a risk to some of that performance, and we've recognised that inside the service, and in any reports we're picking up that risk. The reuse, composting and recycling, I do it the other way around. Recycling, composting and reuse, sorry, that's 25 years the other way around. I think your point was, how do we know that reuse is happening at home? And the short answer is, so that's kind of a national definition. If it's not in the we know we can capture composting data, but we know we can't capture what's happening with reuse. There are national pieces of research that tell us, if you invest a certain amount of money to make sure that you're pushing for behavioural change and you're supporting messages and you're giving people the tools by which to signpost themselves to alternatives to sort of that fast fashion throw things away, you will drive up reuse. And what we should see as the disposal authority is a corresponding downturn in materials in whatever of the waste streams that we have to manage. So we know that that's absolutely the best ambition. Don't produce it in the first place. If you do, reuse it, repurpose it, and then you're into the stuff where we start to see the statistical data because we see the tonnage and the weight. But yes, it's based on, we know from experience of others doing pilots and initiatives and looking at our peers or things that we've done ourselves, that it does have an impact, but it's very difficult to, evidence-led, do that activity and you'll get that corresponding tonnage response. So it's quite tricky. And I think the last one that you mentioned, but forgive me if I missed any, was fly tipping. And I was going to hand over to Vicky, but what I'll just do beforehand is, we actually have planned to talk to the lead member and just talk through some of the fly tipping. It's a subject that previous iterations of this committee have asked about, fly tipping, and to have sort of some data that shows what's happening across the county. So it might not be down to sites or specific locations. We know that the districts do the fly tipping collections and pick up those incidents, but we as the disposal authority pick up the tab for its actual disposal. So it's in our collective interests to have done historic campaigns on fly tipping, to try and post those messages. I think that was what Vicky was going to say, so I'll save her. But yes, so we and we also know there's a really strong link between what's happening with our neighbours. So if, for example, Leicester City did a huge round of enforcement on fly tipping, you could find it displaces the fly tipping into the county. So, or a district does a huge series of activities on fly tipping enforcement, and it will drive down that performance in that area. So we've done reports in the past, and we've brought them to this committee, that if it was something that you aspired to see, that shows over the past period of years what the trend is looking like. It looks like a heartbeat monitor, but what's the general trend? Is it up? Is it down compared to our nearest neighbours, to our peers, to nationally? So that it's to try and maybe myth bust. If we've done this activity because we're trying to deliver a saving in the MTFS, has it caused fly tipping? And as a rule, the answer to that is no. It's far more complicated than that. It's multiple things happening. But again, it's something, if this committee wanted us to bring something back, we could absolutely do that.
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Sorry, just on the fly tipping, do we track what is being fly tipped as well? Do we keep, just to see if there's a change in trend of what is actually being dumped?
Yeah, there is data reported on, it's basically number of fly tips, and there is some information available sort of categorizing it into sort of different categories of what is being fly tipped, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. Any other questions? Oh, Dr. Hill?
Thank you, Chair. Hectares of land in better management for nature, 97%. That's fantastic, except the definition is conscious decision made in a way that protects or enhances nature. Do we have a management plan for all these sites? Can you prove to me we made a difference? Because I checked back and found in September we had a report about the country parks, of which 3 have sites of special scientific interest. Rather than the September report or this report, do I know what state those SSSIs are in, which is something that is of interest to people who own them. Are they in good, bad or indifferent? And it talks in the other report in September about improving the biodiversity. Can we evidence this? Do we go out and survey? Can we show that we made a difference? So it's nice to say it, but can we prove it? We've got ecologists in the county council because they exist in a little cupboard somewhere. Be facetious, but yeah, we do have trained ecologists in the county council. We've got some very good volunteers across the county. So can we show that this 97% has actually made a difference? Because if you're doing it for biodiversity net gain, you have to have an awful lot of bits of paper to prove you've done something. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, James, if you'd like to handle that one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I think I said at the last committee that when it comes to biodiversity, it's very difficult to measure.
No, it isn't. Shannon Weaver Diversity Index. First thing I did at university.
Well, if you've got the money and resources to do it. So on the KPI in Land and Better Management is the best of a bad lot of a KPI that we could come up with at the time. In some cases there is management plans, but not in all cases. So we've checked with the service areas that manage our land, and we've asked them effectively, are you making a conscious effort to manage the land in the most environmentally friendly way possible? And those that have come back and said yes, we've taken them on their word and measured. So it's an imperfect but quick and dirty way of measuring it at the moment. Again, I've mentioned previously with the local nature recovery strategy and the biodiversity duty that we are looking at what other metrics can we use. It's very difficult to get an overall metric that can tell you everything in one figure. And we can measure things like number of trees planted, hedges, all that kind of stuff. At the last committee was talk about how much pesticides we're using, all that kind of stuff. So we are looking at all those other, rather than key performance indicators that can help inform the overall picture. And we will look to create that, include that in future reports to create that kind of wider picture. On the SSSIs, as you may know, the assessment of SSSIs is carried out by Natural England. As far as I know, Natural England have not done an assessment on our SSSIs, so we don't know the answer. They are under-resourced, financially and with staff as well. So, and that has been an ongoing long-term issue. I understand that they are linked to the local nature recovery strategy and the government's commitments on meeting various biodiversity targets. They're looking to reallocate resource to address that issue. So hopefully we'll get some facts and figures on the SSSIs. I think there's 3 SSSIs that we have on our land. again, through the local nature recovery strategy, we are working with the various volunteers and county recorders. We're actually hosting a county recorder event here in County Hall on the 28th of February to look at how can we better support those county recorders, but more importantly, because they are an ageing population, how can we encourage more younger people to get involved and engaged in county recording and telling us how what's happening in nature in the county. We're also looking at opportunities for doing some citizen science type activities, again, just to create that kind of pen picture of what's happening out there. So we are trying, but it's very expensive and it's costly to try and get accurate, precise information. So all we can do at this point with the resources we've got, the time we've got, is try and create that kind of pen picture of the situation. As you can also see in the report, we do have some national data in terms of river quality, but again, that 2019 is the last time we've got data on that. Air quality data just got released again after we'd finalised the report. So again, there's major lags in the data from the national side, never mind what we can do locally. So we know it's a gap, we know there's room for improvement, and we are trying to fill it, but it's not an easy gap to fill.
Okay.
Thanks. So it's not going to be a proof like the three sides of a right angled triangle, but it's going to be a series of diverse reports and metrics that kind of sum up to a conclusion. Thank you for that. I think Adam's got one question or something you wanted to add.
Yeah, it's just really reiterating what Councillor Bloxham said. Obviously, I brought up palm oil in foods at one of the members' meetings. We just need to clarify that we're not using virgin palm oil because it's one of the biggest factors for deforestation in tropical rainforest. So we can't be seen to be using a green alternative that is actually really destructive and awful for biodiversity in other parts of the world other than ours. And that's just all I need to say. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So that was just a comment, not a question. Yeah, okay, thanks. I left myself till last, unless anybody's got another question. I do have one question. I'm just trying to get my head around the scale of things. In section 15, we talked about a 9.5% reduction in greenhouse gas, which amounts to 8,404 tonnes of carbon dioxide. It just sounded a bit small to me. I'm not sure if I've got the sums right here, but I know there is 5 quintillion tonnes of atmosphere, which is 5 times 10 to the 15, so that's 5,000 billion tonnes of atmosphere. We're saving 8,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide. It sounds like we're barely scratching the surface here. Have I got the right scale, is my question.
Sorry, I don't know if James wants to come in, but just to, I'm not remotely going to try and suggest that the activities that the county council carries out and the carbon impact of those activities aren't teeny in the context of the atmosphere globally, but in that sort of everybody's duty bound to do their part, and we have the national sort of instructions to that effect. Just sorry, and this is if I or the report haven't been clear. The 8,400 tonnes is what we've got left. So we have had a 9.5% reduction, and that's on top of, since 2008, we've actually had a 76% reduction in the carbon from our activities, you know, driving our fleet, etc. So we're left with 8,400 tonnes. And I suppose what I would say is that I would, as officers, we absolutely recognise that 8,400 tonnes that's left from our various activities as an authority is quite complicated to deal with. I think the term, we've dealt with all the low-hanging fruit. We've dealt with the things where it was a really strong undertake this investment and you'll save money. We've done all of those things, and what we're now left with is quite complex sources of carbon that require complex solutions that could cost a lot of money. We're back to slightly the earlier conversation of how much money does the council have to invest in its biodiversity measures or metrics. How much do we have to tackle that 8,400 tonnes? There are projects and plans and things still in a pipeline subject to funding that we could do to get that balance down. But even allowing for that, we think we'll still at some point in the future be somewhere 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 tonnes we will not be able to tackle any level of affordability metrics. So then you're into considering now, is it something we should be thinking about in terms of investing in a means by which we could offset that carbon in the future, because we've created our own means by which to do that. We're not having to buy those offsets. Could we create a means by which we do it? But we should be thinking about it now, otherwise those opportunities won't be ready there in the future. But absolutely, Chair, your point is right. What we're talking about relative to the planet is incredibly small, but it's very much specifically the balance is the 8,400 tonnes.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. I just wanted to be sure I was getting the proportions right. So thank you for your comment. Okay, any more questions or comments before we move on? Thank you for that. So I recommend that the report is an annual update for us to note, and the committee's comments will be recorded in the minutes. And we'll move on to item 10 now, which is the Climate Resilience Delivery Plan. Joe Gills, Assistant Director of Environment and Waste, will introduce this item. Thank you, Joe.
Apologies, I think you've heard enough of me and my Geordie dulcet tones this afternoon, so I'll be quick, Chair.
I loved the Geordie accent.
So this report seeks Scrutiny's views, thoughts, opinions on the appended Climate Resilience Delivery Plan, so that your thoughts and observations can then be reported on to Cabinet when this is considered at Cabinet on the 3rd of February. So the policy section of the report sets out how this new plan will support delivery of the Council's environment strategy and strategic plan. It also sets out the Cabinet's changing focus linked to activities within the Council's net zero strategy and plans, with a move towards prioritising actions that tackle climate adaptation and responding to severe weather events. So this plan also includes reallocating that earlier discussed £2 million carbon reserve to flood mitigation and adapting services to address those impacts of severe weather events, as well as any projects that deliver financial savings and or deliver those wider additional social, economic or environmental benefits. The delivery plan itself has a key or a legend in it, so that if you look at one of the columns, you'll see that, and that is just attempting to show members what multiple or core benefits each action is looking to achieve. And it's just to be really transparent, it is less about solely striving for carbon-based projects that reduce carbon. It is broader than that, so those broader environmental, social, economic benefits, they have to sort of be multi-benefits. And we've incorporated the programme of flood mitigation and climate adaptation actions that officers have been asked to focus on, so they're also added into this new plan. The timeframe has also been updated, so we're looking at the next 3 years to tie in and align with that earlier referenced £2 million fund. So it's costed. These are sort of activities that we will deliver against that allocated funding. In terms of monitoring and reporting, the intent is that we propose that progress against the Climate Resilience Delivery Plan is included in the annual environmental performance report, so we can update you each January on how elements within this plan will just make it part of that broader update on environmental performance. The resources section sets out how funds are proposed to be spent over the period of the delivery plan in line with those refocused priorities that I mentioned earlier. And that includes work to tackle those previously discussed high climate change risks, those 6 risks that we talked about. And they predominantly fall into the highways and property service areas. Drainage asset works will also be invested in, as well as community activities. And then really, as you'd expect, the equalities, human rights, wider environmental and health implications have all been considered in having drafted this new plan. And with that, I will pause, Chair, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Any questions? Right, Ms. Bottomley.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'm really impressed. I really like it. I think they've got some great aims and some great things we're striving for. I just had a couple of queries. So the first one, on point 11, are we talking about creating basically a register of suds ponds? Even I know we're not responsible for the maintenance or anything like that, but a register so we know who is responsible, and it makes it a lot easier for residents to find out if maintenance isn't being carried away. I know that's something that we've been pushing for some time. And then this is more of a comment, but I feel like particularly for items 14 and 23, which talks about like reducing reliance on private cars and kind of the benefits of enabling flexible working. I just would like it highlighted and commented that this might then be at odds with the wider administration's push to get people in the office a lot more often. And I think that until evidence can be suggested that it will benefit residents to have officers in the offices significantly more, the benefits highlighted here in our climate resilience delivery plan outweighs those as a comment. Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Chair. I'm going to hand to Jana on the first point, and sorry, tell me if I'm wrong. I think the observation that you made in the second capacity is something that our colleagues need to factor into if there's any reports that are going on to Cabinet feedback in relation to sort of that concern.
Thank you, Jan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, so just in relation to that action, so first of all, there's kind of get your own house in order aspect to this, to be honest, because SUDs have become, as design has progressed, more of a part of our own highway design features. And in terms of kind of making sure that we've got accurate registers of where they are, what they are, and how they need to be maintained, and a register for that, that's the first thing that we'll likely be doing under that action. There's also a kind of pending or a sort of national move, perhaps to move towards us becoming responsible for SUDs in the future from other areas as well. And it would put us in a really good position to do that. But also recently through, I say recently, a bit like Anne, some might have even been the year before last, we've updated our design guide for highways and transport to be more receptive as well to other types of drainage that are more beneficial for the environment or the place as well, and making sure that we can maintain them. So it's going to have kind of multiple purposes, but I think it is fair to say that our first priority should be kind of I guess practicing what we're preaching in relation to that, and being really good at the ones that we've got and the new ones that are coming forward. I feel like all I do is bang on about the MMDR at the moment, but that is an example where we've put new drainage systems in. We will need to maintain them and have a register of those. That is probably the biggest sort of new asset management we've had for a long time in that area. So that will be a starting point for it. So yeah, you're essentially right. But it may serve or may put us in a really good position for wider responsibilities should they come to us in the future. And then if I can just be really cheeky, Chair, I was just going to say, I think the point about the risks around the working arrangements were sort of addressed earlier with the risk that we've noted. But what my team also does is we have a Choose How You Move initiative. We do have travel plans for our own buildings, you know, places that we can bless around as well. So again, we would equally encourage staff to do things like car share, use all modes as part of that, just to sort of, I guess, mitigate some of the risks that you're looking at. But I think the point remains that there would be a change and risk might arise due to that. Is that okay, Chair?
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bottomley, sorry.
Sorry, thank you. Can I just clarify then, so when we're talking about SUDs, are we also considering the SUDs that are being built on new developments? And I know at the moment a lot of them are owned by private management companies, and they're an absolute nightmare to try and figure out who's responsible. Is there any kind of plan to have just a register of those, or to have, you know, be working with the districts and boroughs as the LPAs to put in things? I don't know the feasibility, but as a condition that they have to give us that data, and if it changes hands or they sell it, they have to update the register just to make residents' lives easier in these new developments if they know exactly who is responsible to maintain. I know that we're not taking on responsibility for the maintenance, but just to almost be the first point of call for people to find out who is responsible.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I think with new developments, and particularly where we've, since we've had the responsibility of commenting on planning applications, for instance, so we would know where they are, I think we're starting to build that understanding of what should be part of a development and agreed. I think what in reality happens is the longer that development is in place, the harder it is then to trace that responsibility through. So I wouldn't want to sort of promise you that someone could call, we would know exactly, but it's certainly something that is becoming more part of our work. And I think working with the LPAs is something we could look at. equally, where those, I suppose the other thing to say is where those assets, if you like, or SUDs definitely interact with the operation, say of the highway or that type of thing, then we absolutely are recording those and making sure that's consistent. I think it's fair to say, James would say that that's been something that's a bit been hit and miss in the past, and we would want to do that. But I think where they purely serve a development private purpose, I can't promise you that we will have an up-to-date register of all of those, but it's certainly something that everybody is interested in putting together.
Thank you. Mr. Chapman has a question. Oh, sorry, carry on, Anne.
Sorry, if I could just take a half a minute to just add a couple of things on that. As Jana also mentioned, there is pending legislation that if the government enacted, it would then give us, as the local flood authority, the responsibility of managing those SUDs that have been approved. Doesn't help the ones that have already gone through the system, but ones through new approvals, but that's not been enacted yet. I think the issue being if they give us that responsibility to take on and manage them, we'd have to have a budget to do it. I think that's the prime issue there. However, one other thing, I was just asked last week to comment on a new consultation come out from MHCLG about reducing the prevalence of private estate management arrangements. I think we all know it's fairly much a national issue and challenge for communities. So I think government hopefully might be helping and trying to grasp a nettle on that. So just to advise you about that.
Thanks, Anne. Mr. Chapman had a question.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, going back to the working from home bit again. Has anyone done any work on the fact is, sometimes you can walk around the offices here and there's one person in an office. The lights are on, the heating's on and everything else. Then you've got 9 people working at their homes with their heating and lighting on. Has anyone done that calculation of what the offset of the carbon, what they're by doing it 9 different places to being in the office, to how many miles travelled it is worth, it's less carbon being used actually from to be in the office. Do you get what I mean by that? Because obviously there's going to be a figure somewhere where you've got the office empty compared to those 9 working at home, which is there a balance where it pays to have people in the office or people to stay at home? So I just wondered if there's an equation for that.
Who wants to take that one?
Not me, Chair. I am going to hand over to James. But
okay, James.
We have been asked that question before, and we've had to be very careful, even in the positives of people when they moved to work from home, not to necessarily argue that that was an environmental benefit per se. There are different, here we go, push and pull of different benefits in different places. But James, we've definitely been asked this question before.
Yes, as Joe said, we have tried to do a calculation on this prior to the working from home and COVID and so on. It's very difficult because everyone's circumstance is different. What if there's already somebody in the house and you're not heating it, blah, 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 blah. And it also depends on the vehicle they're driving and how efficient that is and how far they're driving. From memory, because it is 6 years ago since we did the calculations, I think we ended up working out you would have to travel between 50 and 100 kilometers round trip to justify kind of work from home, because generally speaking, houses tend to be less efficient than offices, but that would also depends on the office as well. You know what I mean? So there's so many, again, going back to my previous response, there are so many variables to take into account. It's very difficult to get an exact calculation, and we could pay a consultant to do it, but we'd waste loads of money doing that. But our best calculation was somewhere between 50 and 100 kilometers round trip per day. Per day, yes. Because it's where the efficiencies are located. Is in the house, is in the car, is in the office. You know what I mean? So there's all those variables to take into account. So we were surprised with the answer as well.
Good question. Thank you for that. Okay, Mr. Tilbury had a question.
Yeah, it's not more of a statement, really. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Bottomley's thing about if we could get like an asset list, because I'll just get, I have mentioned it before. It does create a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, because for instance, I can't remember if it was in Styleby or Syston, there was a SUD that belonged to us or the housing developer, yet the crash cover on top of it belong to the vice versa. And it took them about 3 months to work out whose was who. I know it's like a massive undertaking, but I think we'd have to do it like all in one go. But if we start making like a gradual asset list, I think it's only beneficial for the council for efficiency and for also just reacting to flood events and things like that. That's just my point, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. So, Joe, we took a break there for questions. Presumably you've got more to carry on with? Sorry, Dr. Hill.
Thank you. I feel like donkey, from Animal Farm sometimes, because I can remember people in the council chamber, and I suspect it was for Ann Carruthers' time, saying we must make our highways and our network more resilient to flooding. Anyway, here we are. Still hasn't happened. But what I wondered, given we are the flood authority and we do all the advice on SUDs and all the rest of it, how many planning applications have we turned down because of flooding? Rather, have we advised the districts to turn down because of flooding? Because we don't always directly make the decision. I accept that.
I think, to be honest, we'd have to come back with you. I don't have that fact off the top of my head, actually, if we could come back to you. Bear in mind, however, we will have to work aligned to all the, one, firstly, MPPF, and then two, the specific guidance. But yeah, we could get you that, but I don't have it off the top of my head. Sorry, unless Jana does, obviously.
Sorry, I was just going to put into context as well, because what you probably won't see in the figures is the amount of iterations that come through. So I think perhaps we could put that in some context for you when it comes through. But yeah,
I used to serve on planning applications both here and at district. I understand the iterations, but and how much the iterations, I often see things and you get an independent expert from the residents who vehemently disagree with our advice. And I wonder how often, because to be blunt, highways don't often push a refusal that they want to argue about and appeal. And I wonder how often we've done it on flooding, because it's something we're all concerned about. It's on this thing. So how often do we actually push it to the limit and say, no, you can't do that? I'm just interested to know.
Yeah, I think the best thing is to answer the question directly. I'd have to check. I wouldn't want to do that. And like I say, most of the initial advice might be negative, but with iterations, you might change the position. But I think there is something about the balance of how likely you are to win that appeal within the planning policy that Anne mentioned. And I think there are, increasingly difficult sites for delivery, whether that be from a highways and transport point of view or a flooding one. So I do expect to see it. You might see more of those comments from our consultations, because the sites that we're dealing with, we're finding it harder at times to reach that sort of iteration where we think we've solved it. But I can answer the question directly, I think is the best thing to do.
Thank you. We've got one more question, I think, from Mrs. Seaton.
No, thank you, Chair. I really just feel a little bit guilty that I've not said anything up to now, so I'm going to chip in. It was really in response to your asset list on SUDs, and obviously this is the flood. I'm subbing today, so I might not be saying this in the right place, but it's got the word flood in it, so I'm going with it's okay. And that's and riparian rights and responsibilities. Have we got, it's something that in my area that I'm dealing with at the moment, and it's extremely difficult to get from county council and a list of who has the riparian rights. I mean, we're going through it now, so it's all right. So I've sorted out my problem, but it must be a problem Leicestershire wide. And I just wondered whether we have got enough teeth to enforce those riparian responsibilities, because really when you think about developments coming up, so we've got developments where Melton Brook is running through it. Does the developer have the riparian responsibilities, or does the house that leads down to that the brook have riparian responsibilities? Have we suitably sorted all that out so that the responsibility doesn't fall on our shoulders every time, and we can argue who's got the responsibility and who hasn't? That's me.
Thank you. Who would like, Jana?
Yeah, so again, I think it's one of those, be honest, where you're looking at the sort of modern contemporary situation being better than previous, because from your experience you'd have seen that historic ones take some investigation. It's not always that clear. so I think going forward, certainly in terms of whose responsibility it is, very similar to the SUDS question, you know, that is improving. Have we got enough teeth on enforcement? I think it's still the same. The ability is there, providing you've got the right information, you're sure about what the cause of any flood risk is, because it's not always obvious just where the flooding is and might not be where it's caused by, and also kind of the costs involved in any legal action or stuff being weighed up. So we do have the ability to do that, but I think from your own knowledge you'll know that it's not always and not often actually that clear cut to immediately start that. And actually what we tend to find is better to work with the community and the riparian owners who perhaps wouldn't have been aware of their responsibilities, to make sure that we've gone down that route first of all.
Yeah, if I could just come back on to the awareness of the responsibility. So when we're doing a planning application, when a planning application is being put forward and there's advice from all sorts of agencies, I think that repair and responsibilities should be on that as well. And therefore the awareness would be there from the very get-go, wouldn't it? So just a thought. Thank you.
Okay, just a final comment, was that? Yeah. Yeah, no question. Okay. Are you done, Joe? Thank you. Sorry, any more questions? Right, okay, well, thank you for that, everybody. I recommend the views of the committee are reported to the Cabinet for consideration at its meeting on the 3rd of February 2026, and the committee's comments will be recorded in the minutes. Everybody happy with that? Jolly good. Thank you. That brings us on to number 11 then. Item 11, date of next meeting of the Environment, Flooding and Climate Change Overview Scrutiny Committee will be held on 9th of March 2026 at 2 p.m. Item 12, there being no other items or urgent business, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody.